6 miles. That's the distance between life and death. In the heart of the Black Ridge Mountains, where a storm can freeze your blood in seconds, Arya, an Omega, made a choice that would shatter the hierarchy of the werewolf world. She wasn't prepared. No backpack. No supplies. Just a dying 300-pound alpha wolf on a makeshift sled, dragging him through waist-deep snow while her body screamed for mercy. She didn't know he was the king. She didn't know that by saving him, she was painting a target on her back. All she knew was that he was dying, and she was the only one foolish enough to care. But when the king wakes up, the reward isn't gratitude. It's possession. The wind howled like a banshee through the skeletal trees of the Black Ridge Forest, the kind of sound that makes even the toughest warriors shiver. But for Arya Vance, it was just another Tuesday. At 22 years old, Arya had learned to blend into the shadows, unseen and unnoticed. As an Omega in the Silver Pine Pack, she was ranked lower than the dirt beneath the warriors' boots. She wasn't abused physically, at least not anymore, but the neglect was a cold, heavy burden. She lived alone, in a rundown cabin 3 miles outside the pack's territory, tolerated only because she was the best herbalist around. She brewed tonics for pregnant she-wolves and salves for training injuries. In return, the pack's beta, a grumpy man named Kyle, allowed her to exist. Today, the blizzard was a wall of white, with visibility barely reaching 5 feet. Arya pulled her woolen scarf tighter around her face, her breath crystallizing in the frigid air. She had been out scavenging for winter berries and frost root, rare ingredients that only grew in the harshest of cold. "Stupid," she muttered, her voice lost in the gale. "Should have stayed by the fire." As she turned to head back, her boots crunching through the snow, she caught the scent. Metallic, sharp and sweet blood. But this wasn't the scent of a deer or rabbit. It was Pau. Refoul, laced with the unmistakable musk of a shifter. And beneath the blood, there was something else, something rotting and acrid. Wolfsbane. Arya hesitated. The logical part of her, the one that had kept her alive as a lone Omega for 4 years, screamed at her to run. An injured wolf meant trouble. A wolf poison with wolfsbane meant war, assassins or rogue attacks. But Arya was a healer before she was a survivor. Cursing under her breath, she followed the scent. She found him in a ravine, collapsed and half-buried in snow. He was enormous. Even with her limited experience from watching the pack warriors train, she had never seen a wolf of this size. His fur was pitch black, darker than the night itself, absorbing what little light pierced through the storm. He was breathing shallowly, his body heaving with effort. Arya slid down the embankment, losing her footing and tumbling into the snow next to him. The damage was horrifying. A deep gash ran along his ribs, not immediately fatal, but the edges were black and oozing a sickly green pus. Liquid wolf's bane. A concentrated dose. "Hey," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "Can you hear me?" His ear twitched. A low rumbling growl vibrated in his chest, but he didn't snap at her. He was too weak to lift his head. Arya scanned the area. He was miles from the territory's boundaries. If she left him to get help, he would be dead within the hour. The cold would finish what the poison had started. But he was massive. In wolf form, he must have weighed close to 300 pounds. Arya was 5 feet 4 inches and barely 120 pounds. "You're going to owe me for this," she grunted, uncoiling the rope she used to bundle firewood. She didn't have a sled, but she had a thick tarp for dragging wood. It would have to do. Getting him onto the tarp was a battle of physics and sheer willpower. She grabbed his front paws, apologizing as she hauled his dead weight. The wolf whined in agony, a sound that tore at her heart. I know, she gasped, sweat beading on her forehead despite the freezing temperatures. "Work with me, big guy." It took her 20 minutes to get him onto the tarp. By the time she secured the ropes around her waist and shoulders, Arya's legs were burning. She looked up at the steep ravine, then at the compass on her wrist. Her cabin was 6 miles away, 6 miles through a blizzard that was rapidly becoming a whiteout. One step, she told herself. Just one step. She leaned forward, straining against the rope. The weight dug into her hips, bruising her skin instantly. The wolf shifted, inching forward. Then another inch. The journey was pure agony. Every 100 yards, Arya had to stop, her lungs burning as if filled with glass. The snow was getting deeper, dragging at the wolf and making him feel like he weighed a ton. By the second mile, the feeling in her toes had completely disappeared. By the third, she began to hallucinate. She thought she saw her mother, who had died years ago, beckoning from the trees. "Not today," Arya hissed through chattering teeth. She looked back at the wolf. He had stopped shivering. That was a bad sign. "Don't you dare die on me," she snapped. "I'm not dragging your heavy carcass through hell just for you to freeze." She fell to her knees, crawling back to him. She pulled off her heavy outer coat and draped it over his massive body. She was left exposed to the wind in just her wool sweater, but his body heat was fading. "Stay with me," she urged, her hands on his head. For a moment, his eyes fluttered open. Gold. His eyes were molten gold. Not the yellow of a normal wolf. The color of his eyes, royal, powerful and ancient, spoke of bloodlines long forgotten. As she stared back at him for a fleeting moment, the pain in his gaze shifted into confusion. And then something else. Recognition. With a soft exhale, he nudged her hand with his wet nose before his eyes fluttered shut. Arya scrambled to her feet, ignoring the screams of her frozen muscles. She harnessed H. Erzelf again. "Just 3 more miles," she screamed into the howling wind, tears freezing on her cheeks. Only 3 more miles. The last mile was a blur of agony. Arya fell 4 times. By the 4th fall, she thought she might not be able to get up again. The snow was waist-deep now, the wind fierce enough to uproot trees. But the image of those golden eyes haunted her. He was fighting so desperately to stay alive. The least she could do was walk. When the outline of her cabin finally emerged through the thick white haze, there was no relief in Arya's chest. Only emptiness. She was numb. She dragged the heavy load up the ramp to the porch, her vision narrowing. She kicked the door open, the warmth from the dying embers of the hearth spilling out. With a final scream of effort, she hauled the wolf inside and collapsed onto the floorboards. The door slammed shut behind them, blown by the wind. Silence descended, broken only by the crackling stove and the wolf's labored breathing. Arya lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, too exhausted to move. She had made it. But as her gaze shifted to the enormous black wolf filling her tiny living room, she realized that the hardest part was only just beginning. She had to extract the poison. And deep in her gut, she knew that if this wolf died in her cabin, whoever had poisoned him would come for her next. With great effort, Arya forced herself to move. Every joint felt like it was rusted in place. She crawled to the wood stove, shoving 3 large logs into the embers before blowing on them until flames leapt up the chimney. The heat stung her frostbitten face. She stripped off her wet gloves and boots, wincing as the blood rushed painfully back into her frozen limbs. It felt like needles piercing her skin, but there was no time for self-pity. She turned to the wolf. The warmth of the cabin was helping. His breathing was deeper now, though still raspy. She needed to clean his wound before he shifted back. If he shifted with the poison still inside him, the toxin would fuse with his human form, causing organ failure. She reached for her apothecary shelf, the only valuable thing she owned. Rows of glass jars filled with dried herbs, roots, and tinctures lined the wall. She grabbed a jar of crushed silver leaf, a paste of charcoal and honey, and a sterilized scalpel. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, kneeling beside his massive head. The wolf lay unconscious, lost in the fever of the poison. Arya carefully cut away the matted fur around the gash on his ribs. The stench was unbearable. The flesh around the wound was gray, and the veins branching out from it were black as ink. "Hold on," she murmured, applying the charcoal paste to draw out the toxins. The wolf twitched violently, a low whimper escaping his throat. Arya placed a calming hand on his neck, humming a lullaby her mother had once sung. Surprisingly, the wolf settled. For the next hour, Arya worked with the precision of a surgeon. She scraped away necrotic tissue, flushed the wound with distilled water and moonflower extract, and packed it with silver leaf to speed the healing process. As she finished bandaging his torso, the air in the cabin shifted. The pressure dropped. The hairs on Arya's arms stood on end. The snapping of bones echoed in the room. Arya scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall. The transformation had begun. The massive black fur retracted, bones reshaped, and the snout receded. It was a violent, jerky process, made even worse by his weakened state. Usually, shifters didn't shift back until they were safe, but the wolf's pain confused the process, forcing the body to seek its natural human form to conserve energy. Within moments, the giant wolf was gone, and in his place lay a man. Arya covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. He was devastating. Pale from blood loss and slick with sweat, he was the most imposing man she had ever seen. Easily 6 feet 5 inches with broad shoulders that almost covered her entire. Rug. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead. A jagged scar ran from his jaw to his collarbone, old and white against his tanned skin. But it wasn't his size that terrified her. It was the tattoo etched over his heart, a stylized crown entwined with thorns. Arya's blood ran cold. She knew that symbol. Every wolf on the continent knew it. It was the mark of the Blackwood royal line. The man lying half-naked on her floor wasn't just a rogue or a warrior. He was Roman Blackwood, the Alpha King, the ruler of all 5 territories, the man rumored to have slaughtered an entire rebellion single-handedly 3 years ago. "Oh no," Arya whispered, panic rising in her throat. "No, no, no." Saving a stranger was one thing, but saving the king? That was treason if he died and a political nightmare if he lived. Why was the king alone in the woods? Where were his royal guards? As if hearing her thoughts, Roman gasped, his back arching off the floor as a guttural roar tore from his throat. The remaining poison fought desperately against his body. Arya rushed forward, forgetting her fear. He was seizing. "Stay down," she commanded, pressing her weight onto his shoulders. It felt like trying to hold down a boulder. His skin was burning hot, his fever spiking. "Water," she muttered, grabbing a ladle from the bucket by the door and bringing it to his lips. "Drink. You need to drink." Roman's eyes snapped open. Arya froze. Those gold eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that felt like a laser. They were delirious, glazed with pain, but still there. The power in his grip was unmistakable. Roman's hand clamped around Arya's wrist with an intensity that was almost crushing. His breath was ragged, a hoarse whisper escaping his lips. "Mate," he rasped, barely audible, dry and broken. Arya's heart froze. She shook her head frantically, trying to deny what was happening. "No, no, you're confused. It's the poison. I'm just Arya." "Mate," he repeated, this time louder, his body strained. Angie to pull her closer. His nostrils flared as he inhaled deeply, the scent of vanilla and rain filling the air. "Mine." "You're hallucinating, Your Majesty," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. She pried his fingers off her wrist. "You need rest. The poison's still affecting you." Roman stared at her for a long moment, his gaze briefly drifting to her lips before returning to her eyes. It was as if he wanted to devour her, but his body betrayed him. His eyes rolled back and his head fell to the side. Unconscious once more. Arya sat back on her heels, a sharp breath escaping her as she processed what had just occurred. Mate? That was impossible. The king didn't mate with omegas. He mated with highborn she-wolves, daughters of alphas and betas. The idea of an omega and the king mating was biologically incompatible, or so the stories went. She glanced at her wrist. The imprint of his hand had already begun to fade, but the sensation lingered, creeping up her arm and settling heavily in her chest. She stood up, pacing the small cabin. She should leave. She should run back to the pack house and tell Alpha Miller that the king was here. But if she did and they found him dead, they would blame her. Worse still, if the person who had poisoned him was someone in power, revealing this to the wrong person could get them both killed. She was trapped. The storm outside raged louder, the howling winds making it impossible to hear anything but the deafening roar of nature. She went to the window, gazing out into the swirling snow. No one would come tonight. She was stuck in a one-room cabin with the most dangerous man in the world, who had just claimed her as his mate in a fever-induced dream. She grabbed a blanket and curled up in the farthest armchair from him, her hands resting on the knife in her lap. Hours passed. The fire in the hearth burned low. Around 3 in the morning, a sound pierced the howling wind. It wasn't natural. It was mechanical. The roar of snowmobiles. Arya jumped up, rushing to the window. Through the swirling snow, headlights cut through the darkness. Dozens of them. The cabin was surrounded. A voice, amplified by a megaphone, bellowed over the storm. "This is the royal guard. We know he's in there. Surrender the king or we will burn this cabin to the ground." Arya looked back at Roman, still unconscious, lying like a broken shell. She whispered, gripping her knife tightly. "Well, it was a nice life while it lasted." She walked to the door, throwing the bolt. Her hand hovered over the deadbolt. The voice outside came again, louder, more impatient, laced with cruelty that didn't sit right with the royal guard's reputation. "Open up, by order of the crown." Arya stepped back from the door, her mind racing. If they were the royal guard, they'd have a tracker on the king. They wouldn't need to ask if he was inside. They would know. And they certainly wouldn't threaten to burn the cabin down with the king incapacitated inside. Liars. She rushed back to Roman. He was still unconscious, his body burning with feverish heat. She couldn't move him again. Her body was spent, and there was nowhere to go. The cabin was a box. They were trapped. Desperation drove her to the fireplace. She grabbed the heavy iron poker. Not a sword, but still solid and heavy. Then she scrambled to her apothecary shelf, grabbing jars of concentrated ammonia, powdered bleach and dried crushed chilies, 10 times more potent than anything she had used in salves. Suddenly, the window by the door shattered with a loud crash. A canister hissed as it rolled across the floor, releasing thick, acrid tear gas. Arya didn't hesitate. She tore a strip of cloth from her hem, soaked it in the water bucket, and tied it around her face. Crawling low, she made her way to Roman and draped a wet quilt over his head, hoping to protect his lungs. "Come on then," she coughed, her eyes burning from the gas. The front door splintered open with a violent crash. Wind swirling the gas into the room. 2 figures in tactical gear entered. There were no royal insignias. They carried assault rifles, but also silver knives strapped to their thighs. "Check the back," the lead man barked. "Kill the girl. Secure the Alpha." Arya hid behind the overturned kitchen table. As the second man passed her, she lunged. She didn't have the strength of a wolf, but she had the element of surprise and a desperate will to survive. She smashed a jar of ammonia and bleach at his feet. The chemical reaction created a searing cloud of chloramine gas right in his face. The man screamed, clawing at his eyes and throat, dropping his rifle. Arya swung the poker with all her strength, hitting his kneecap with a sickening crunch. He collapsed. The leader spun around, raising his rifle. "You little bitch," he snarled, firing. The bullets tore into the wood of the table, splintering it and sending shards into Arya's face. She curled into a ball, covering her head, bracing for death. She was an Omega with a stick fighting trained assassins. Click. The gun jammed. Or maybe it was empty. The assassin dropped the rifle with a growl, drawing a serrated silver knife. "I'll skin you slowly for that." He lunged. Arya scrambled back, her back hitting the wall. There was nowhere to run. She raised her arms to block the strike, squeezing her eyes shut, but the blow never came. A low, earth-shaking snarl vibrated through the floorboards, shaking jars on the shelves. Arya opened her eyes. Roman was standing. He was swaying, his skin pale as death, the bandages on his ribs soaked through with fresh blood. But he was standing and he looked like a god of war. The assassin froze. "Your Highness." She should have been dead. Roman stood silent, his eyes swallowed by the darkness, no whites, no gold. Only the void of the wolf inside him, taking over to protect its mate. In a move that defied the injuries ravaging his body, the woman struck. He didn't need to shift. With force, he caught the assassin's wrist midair, the sound of the radius snapping loud enough to pierce through the blizzard. The assassin screamed, but Roman silenced him with a brutal strike to his throat. It was a decisive, ruthless move. A king's move forged in years of battle. He tossed the body aside like a rag doll. His gaze shifted to the second man, the one blinded by the gas, crawling toward the door. Roman took a step, and with a single crushing motion, he shattered the man's skull beneath his bare heel. Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the howl of the wind. Roman stood amidst the carnage, chest heaving, his breath ragged. Slowly he turned to Arya. The darkness in his eyes receded, revealing molten gold beneath. Blinking, confusion mixed with the adrenaline still surging through him. He looked at the bodies, then back at Arya, trembling with the iron poker still gripped in her hands, her face streaked with soot and blood. He took a step toward her. Arya flinched, the violence she had just witnessed etched into her mind. Roman stopped immediately. A pang of realization flashed across his face. He extended his hand, palm up. Did they? His voice was thick, gravelly. Did they hurt you? Arya dropped the poker, the clang of metal echoing in the stillness. No, I'm okay. Roman's knees buckled beneath him. Arya rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed to the floor. He was heavy, burning hot. The adrenaline was fading, and the poison was reclaiming its territory. You idiot! She sobbed, sliding to the floor with him, cradling his head in her lap. You shouldn't have moved. You ripped your stitches. Roman blinked up at her, his vision blurring. He reached up, brushing away a smudge of soot from her cheek. You fought, he whispered, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. My Omega fought. I'm not your Omega, she argued weakly, applying pressure to his bleeding side. We'll see, he murmured, eyes closing. Then the sound of rotors cut through the air, a spotlight from the helicopter beaming down, illuminating the snow outside. A voice boomed through the loudspeaker. This is Commander Silas of the Elite Royal Guard. Surround the perimeter. Leave no survivors. Arya stiffened, her body taut with fear. More of them. Roman's eyes barely stayed open as he breathed out. Silas. Silas is good, he whispered, the words barely making it past his lips. Moments later, the doorway filled with wolves in black armor, moving with a discipline that set them apart from the first group. A tall man with a scar through his eyebrow stepped forward, his gun drawn. His gaze swept across the room. Dead bodies, a king on the floor, and a small terrified woman covered in blood holding him. Step away from him. Silas roared, his weapon aimed at Arya. Don't you dare. Arya screamed back, her protective instinct rising, overriding her common sense. He's bleeding out. If I let go, he loses pressure. Silas paused, stunned by the defiance in this small woman. Roman let out a low growl, weak but filled with command. He reached for Arya's hand, intertwining their fingers. Mine, Roman choked out, staring directly at Silas. Save her. Then the king's hand went limp. The next 6 hours were a blur of noise, lights, and chaotic motion. Arya was separated from Roman the moment the helicopter touched down at the Silver Pine Pack house, the closest stronghold secure enough to house the king. She was shoved aside by medics, ignored by warriors, and looked at with open suspicion. She tried to explain about the wolf's bane, the dosage, the silver leaf she had packed into the wound, but a haughty royal doctor simply shoved her toward a waiting area. We know how to treat our king, girl, he snapped. Go sit down before you get arrested for obstruction. Now, Arya sat in the grand hallway of the pack house, still wearing her blood-stained sweater and muddy boots. The contrast was jarring. The Silver Pine Pack was rich there. Marble floors and crystal chandeliers, a stark reminder of her own humble origins. She, the herbalist from the woods, looked like a stain on their pristine carpet. Exhausted, her hands trembled. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind the sharp sting of frostbite on her toes, and the aching bruise around her waist where the sled rope had dug into her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. No one offered her a blanket. No one offered her water. Alpha Miller, leader of the Silver Pine Pack, was pacing in the hall, his hushed conversation with Commander Silas punctuated by the occasional pause. Miller's face was slick with sweat, and his usually charming smile was absent. I had no idea he was in my territory, Miller was saying, his voice strained. If I had known, if you had known, Silas replied coldly, maybe he wouldn't have been ambushed 3 miles from your border. We are investigating how the assassins knew his route, Silas continued. Until we know, everyone is a suspect, including you, Miller. Miller paled. His eyes landed on Arya, and his expression darkened. And what is she doing here? Miller sneered, striding toward her. The outcast. Did she lure him into the trap? Arya stiffened, standing. I saved him. Miller let out a cruel bark of laughter. You? An Omega who can't even shift properly? You saved the Alpha King. He turned to Silas, his tone venomous. She's a liar and a thief. Probably stole from his body while he was unconscious. I'll have her thrown into the cells until she confesses. No, Arya said, her voice trembling but firm. I dragged him 6 miles. I pulled the poison. I kept him alive. 6 miles in a blizzard. Miller stepped into her personal space, his alpha aura pressing against her. The weight of it hit her like a physical blow, forcing her knees to bend. Do not lie to me, he growled. You're nothing. You're dirt. Arya gasped for air, her instinct to submit clashing with her rising anger. Enough, Silas commanded, stepping between them. The king has given an order regarding her. She stays. Delirious, Miller spat. Look at her. She's filthy. Suddenly, the double doors at the end of the hall banged open. A nurse rushed out, her face a mask of fear. Commander, he's awake. He's tearing the restraints. Silas's eyes widened. Is he in pain? No, the nurse stammered. He's asking for someone. He's asking for Arya. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Alpha Miller's jaw dropped. Silas turned to Arya. Come with me. Now. Without hesitation, Arya sprinted past them, her boots squeaking against the marble floor. The Royal Medical Wing was in chaos. Equipment lay overturned, and 2 doctors huddled in the corner, visibly trembling. Roman sat on the edge of the bed, pulling IVs from his arms. Shirtless, his torso was wrapped in fresh white bandages that were already beginning to stain with blood. His eyes were wild, frantic as they darted around the room. Where is she? He roared, his voice breaking the glass in the nearby cabinet. If you touched her, he hissed, I'll burn this pack to ash. Arya, she called from the doorway. Roman's head snapped up. The moment his gaze fell on her, the feral energy in the room melted away, replaced by a tidal wave of relief. Arya, he whispered. Without waiting for her to approach, he tried to stand, stumbling. Arya rushed to him, catching him before he could fall. Stop, she urged. You'll kill yourself. Ignoring the pain, Roman wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face to her neck. He inhaled deeply, letting the tension seep from his muscles. You're safe. You're here. I'm here, she whispered, awkwardly patting his back. I'm not going anywhere. Commander Silas and Alpha Miller stood in the doorway, watching in stunned silence. The Alpha King, known as the Iron Wolf, the man who supposedly had no heart, was clinging to a tiny dirty Omega as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. Roman pulled back slightly, still holding her by the shoulders. He studied her face, his gaze narrowing as he noticed the details he had missed in the cabin. The purple shadows under her eyes, the raw red skin on her cheeks from windburn. His eyes dropped to her hands. He grabbed them and Arya tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. Turning her palms up, he saw the blistered and bloody skin, raw from the rope. Roman's expression turned cold, deadly cold. Who did this? He asked, his voice softer than before. It's from the rope, Arya stammered. From the sled. Roman glanced at Silas. How far was the cabin from the sled tracks? Silas swallowed. He pulled out a tablet, his voice tight. We backtracked the drag marks, Your Majesty. They started at the ravine near the North Pass. Roman's eyes narrowed, his voice thick with emotion. That's 6 miles. He turned back to Arya. You dragged a 300-pound sled 6 miles? Arya shrugged, looking at her feet. You were heavy. Roman let out a breath that was almost a sob, pulling her hands to his lips and kissing the bloody palms. Why? He whispered. Because you were dying, Arya said simply. And no one deserves to die alone in the snow. Roman closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by the steely resolve of a king. He turned to Alpha Miller, who was still standing in the doorway, trembling. Miller, Roman said quietly, but with the weight of a command. Yes, Your Majesty, Miller squeaked. Roman squeezed Arya's hand, his voice growing cold. My mate, he said, his gaze never leaving Arya's face. She lives in a shack in your woods. She wears rags. She is malnourished. And yet, she has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline. Miller stammered. Your Majesty, she is just an Omega. Roman's tone shifted to a deadly alpha growl, bringing the room to its knees, everyone except Arya, who stood rooted by his grip. She is your queen, Roman snarled, his words laced with power. From this day forward, any disrespect shown to her is an act of treason against the crown, punishable by death. He turned back to Arya, his gaze softening. You saved my life, Arya Vance. Now let me give you yours. Arya looked at the man who had dragged himself through hell. She saw the promise in his eyes, but she also saw the danger. She wasn't just the invisible Omega anymore. She was the Lunar of the entire kingdom, and the people who had tried to kill Roman were still out there. I don't need a kingdom, Roman, she whispered. I just need a nap. Roman chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that filled the room. He shifted on the bed, patting the space beside him. Command accepted. As Arya hesitantly sat down beside him, and the King of Wolves draped his arm over her, shielding her from the world, she realized one thing. The blizzard was over, but the storm had only just begun. Roman's gaze remained fixed on Arya, a flicker of amusement darkening to something deeper, more respectful. So, things that suffer in the cold, they become stronger. Is that your theory? He asked. Arya held his gaze, her voice firm as she replied. It's not a theory. It's a fact. Comfort makes things soft. Hardship makes them potent. Roman's grip on her hand tightened, a quiet strength radiating from him. Then you must be the most potent creature I have ever met. As they approached the obsidian citadel, the convoy slowed. A fortress forged into the side of a dormant volcano loomed ahead, towering over the capital. City below. Its black stone walls drank the sunlight, and banners of the Blackwood Line, emblazoned with a crown and thorns, snapped in the wind. When the cars rolled into the massive courtyard, Arya's breath caught in her chest. Hundreds of eyes were on them, not just guards but dignitaries, servants, and nobles draped in silks and furs. Arya shrank back into the leather seat. Do I have to go out there? She whispered, anxiety thick in her voice. Roman's response was unwavering. You are the Luna. You do not bow to them. They bow to you. He opened the door and stepped out, his presence commanding. A cheer rose from the crowd, deafening in its intensity. The king lives. Roman reached back inside, offering his hand to Arya. She took it, her heart racing as she stepped out of the car. The crowd's cheers faltered the moment they saw her. Arya was clad in a borrowed tracksuit, her hair tied up in a messy bun, no jewelry, no makeup, and a slight limp from the trek. The women in the front row exchanged confused and judgmental glances, their eyes silently asking, "Who is this stray?" Roman sensed her discomfort immediately. He stopped walking, the courtyard falling into an expectant silence. He pulled Arya flush against his side, his arm wrapping around her waist like an unbreakable steel band. His alpha aura surged, a powerful wave that forced every wolf in the crowd to bow their heads in submission. "Raise your heads," Roman commanded. His voice was quiet but unmistakable, carrying across the courtyard. Reluctantly, the crowd obeyed. "This is Arya," Roman announced, his voice filled with conviction. "She carried me through the White Death. She bled so that I could live. You look at her and see an Omega. I look at her and see the only reason your king is standing before you." His gaze shifted to a tall woman at the front, her face pinched with distaste. Lady Victoria, daughter of the Southern Duke. "Anyone," Roman's voice dropped to a low growl, "who finds her presence unworthy can leave my city now. If you stay, you will show her the same reverence you show me." Lady Victoria bowed her head, quickly submitting to his command. The ripple of compliance spread through the rest of the court, a collective movement that swept through them like wind through wheat. "Come," Roman whispered to Arya. "Let's get you something to eat." Inside the palace, Arya was swept away by a team of silent maids. They bathed her in a massive tub, its water scented with lavender and rose oil to cover the lingering sense of pain and sickness. Then they dressed her in a gown of midnight blue silk that felt like water against her skin. It covered her bruises, but the back of the gown was open, revealing the delicate curve of her spine. When she looked into the mirror, Arya barely recognized herself. The woman staring back wasn't the lonely herbalist from the woods. She looked regal, but her eyes remained the same, watchful, wary. Roman was waiting for her in his private study, standing near the fireplace with a document in hand. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening. The paper slipped from his grasp as he took a step toward her, stopping just inches away. The heat radiating from him was intense, but he didn't touch her. Beautiful, he murmured, his voice low. Arya tugged uncomfortably at the silk. It itches. Roman laughed, the tension in the room finally breaking. I'll have them burn it and bring you sweatpants. Arya smiled in response, but Roman's demeanor quickly grew serious. He gestured to the document on the floor. The toxicology report came back from your cabin. Arya stiffened as she glanced at the paper. It was a binary poison, Roman continued, his voice tight. Wolfsbane mixed with a synthetic anticoagulant. A formula developed in a lab. Only one faction has access to this kind of technology. Who? Arya asked, her voice tight with suspicion. The Iron Circle, Roman replied, his tone laced with bitterness. My own war. Council. Arya felt a chill settle deep within her. One of your generals? Yes. Roman's voice grew heavier. I was on my way to a secret meeting with an informant who claimed to have proof of treason. I never made it. My pilot was drugged, the chopper went down, and I barely managed to pull myself out before it exploded. That's when the dart hit me. Roman turned to her, his gaze intense. The assassin in your cabin, the one you blinded. We've identified him. He was a mercenary on Duke Valerius's payroll. Valerius. Arya's heart skipped a beat. Who is he? Roman's jaw tightened. My uncle. The betrayal in his voice was undeniable. And the man who is currently sitting in my dining hall, waiting to congratulate me on my survival. Arya's eyes widened. He's here. Roman nodded. He doesn't know we know. He thinks the assassin failed and died without talking. He thinks he's safe. Roman stepped closer, taking Arya's hands in his. Tonight, there is a welcome ball. A hastily arranged celebration of my return. Valerius will be there. He'll try to finish what he started. He won't use a knife or a gun this time. He'll use something subtle. Poison, Arya whispered. Exactly, Roman confirmed. And we'll be ready for him. I need you, Arya, Roman said, his voice carrying an urgency that was impossible to ignore. Not just as my mate. I need your eyes, your nose. You know poisons better than anyone. Can you do this? Can you walk into a room full of vipers and spot the snake? Arya met his gaze, her eyes tracing the scar on his neck, the vulnerability flickering behind his otherwise commanding presence. He was the king of the world, but in this moment in this castle, he was as hunted as she had once been, hiding in the depths of the woods. She squeezed his hands, steadying him as much as herself. I carried you 6 miles, Roman, she whispered softly. I can handle a dinner party. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Citadel was a breathtaking display of excess. See, chandeliers the size of carriages hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over 500 guests. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, roasted meats, and beneath it all, the subtle metallic tang of fear. Everyone knew the king had been attacked. Everyone knew a traitor was lurking somewhere in the room. Arya walked by Roman's side as the herald's voice rang out, announcing them not simply as the king and his guest, but as His Majesty King Roman Blackwood and his mate, the Lady Arya. A murmur spread through the crowd, buzzing like the angry hum of wasps. They descended the grand staircase together. Arya's mind focused on the rhythm of her breath. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Her senses sharpened as her eyes scanned the room, tuning in to every detail. The fake smiles. The spikes of adrenaline from the guards. At the bottom of the stairs, an older man with silver hair approached them, his smile cold and calculated. He wore a sash of metals that gleamed in the light. Roman, the man boomed, spreading his arms wide. By the goddess, it's a miracle. When we heard the chopper went down, Roman responded smoothly, his voice as sharp as glass. He didn't embrace the man. Instead, he clasped his forearm in a warrior's greeting, squeezing just enough to deliver a subtle warning. It takes more than gravity to kill me. Valerius laughed, but his eyes darted toward Arya, narrowing instantly. And this must be the savior. The little wood nymph, Arya. Arya met his gaze without flinching. I prefer herbalist, she replied evenly. Charming, Valerius sneered. Truly Roman, you've always had a taste for the rustic. Roman's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Careful, uncle. You are speaking to your future queen. Valerius stiffened, his amusement gone. Of course, my apologies, he stammered. With a snap of his fingers, a waiter appeared with a tray of crystal flutes filled with amber liquid. A toast, Valerius proclaimed, raising his glass high, to the king's return, and to his new companion. He handed a glass to Roman, then to Arya. Arya accepted the glass, eyeing it with suspicion. The liquid was a rare vintage of Eldorian nectar, a honey wine revered by high society wolves. To the king, Valerius said, raising his glass. Roman brought his glass to his lips. Stop, Arya's voice rang out, calm yet commanding. The room fell silent. Valerius lowered his glass, his face twisting in annoyance. I beg your pardon? Arya held her glass up to the light. Don't drink it, Roman. Is something wrong, my dear? Valerius asked, his smile tight, though the edge of his words betrayed his impatience. It is the finest vintage from my private cellar. Surely it isn't too sophisticated for your palate. Ignoring him, Arya swirled the liquid, inhaling its scent. Eldorian nectar had a distinct aroma. Oak honey and a hint of vanilla. But this, she brought the glass closer to her nose again. This smelled like bitter almonds. Valerius's face drained of color. Ridiculous, he sputtered. You're imagining things. Am I? Arya moved toward him, her voice unwavering. Bitter almonds are the scent of cyanide. In our world, we use a derivative called nightshade essence. It mimics heart failure, and it's undetectable in an autopsy. She held the glass out to him. If I'm wrong, Uncle Valerius, then drink it. Valerius stared at the glass, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The entire room was watching. If he refused, he admitted guilt. If he drank, he died. I am not thirsty, he stammered. Drink it. Roman's voice was a low roar, shaking the glass in the windows. Valerius flinched, his eyes darting around the room. But Roman's men had already moved in, blocking the exits. Panic took over Valerius. He slapped the glass from Arya's hand, shattering it on the marble floor. You witch! He screamed, drawing a hidden pistol from his jacket. He aimed it directly at Roman. But Arya was faster. She had no weapon, but she had her instincts. She threw the contents of a small pouch hidden in her sleeve, a mixture of dried cayenne and powdered glass she had prepared in the kitchen before the ball. The powder hit Valerius square in the eyes. He screamed, firing blindly. The bullet went wide, shattering a bottle of wine on a nearby table. Roman moved in an instant. He didn't shift, he didn't need to. He crossed the room in a blur, grabbing Valerius by the throat and slamming him onto the banquet table. Dishes crashed to the floor. I should rip your head off, Roman snarled, his claws extending and digging into Valerius's skin. Do it. Valerius choked out, still defiant. The council will never accept a peasant queen. Roman leaned in close. Then I'll burn the council down. Roman hauled Valerius to his feet, throwing him toward the commander. Take him to the dungeons. If he dies before I get there, I'll take it out of your hide. The guards dragged the screaming duke away. The ballroom was dead silent. The musicians had stopped. The guests were frozen in place. Roman straightened his jacket and turned to Arya. She stood amidst the broken glass, her chest heaving, her hands still dusted with red pepper powder. Without a word, Roman walked over to her. He didn't care about the audience. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee, causing gasps to ripple through the room. A king never knelt. Not for anyone. Roman took Arya's hand, uncaring of the powder. He kissed her knuckles gently. You saved me in the snow, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. And you saved me in the serpent's den. There was no one else. There never would be. Roman looked up at Arya, his golden eyes glowing with unwavering devotion. Arya Vance, will you do me the honor of ruling beside me, not as a consort, but as my equal, my lunar? Arya gazed at him. Her eyes shifted to the nobles around her, who were staring at her in awe, their terror replaced by admiration. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she had won. Get up, you fool, she whispered, a tear threatening to fall. You're ruining your suit. Is that a yes? Roman grinned. Yes, she replied. But if you ever make me wear a dress like this again, I'm poisoning you. Roman laughed, standing up and pulling her into a passionate kiss. The crowd erupted into applause, not out of formality, but genuine relief and admiration. They had their king, and now they had a queen who could apparently blind a duke with nothing more than a pocket full of sand. As the cheers enveloped them, Arya buried her face in Roman's chest. "Is it over?" she mumbled. "The threat from Valerius?" "Yes," Roman whispered, his voice low as he held her close. "But you've just proved you're more dangerous and clever than any aristocrat here. Now we deal with the wedding." Arya groaned. "Can we just go back to the cabin? Maybe for the honeymoon." Roman winked. 6 months later, the obsidian citadel was draped in gold and black for the royal mating ceremony. While the servants adorned the halls with garlands of winter bloom, a final threat lingered in the map room. Alpha Kyle of the Ironclaw pack, a burly brute of a man, slammed his fist onto the obsidian table. "I will not bow to a weakling," he spat at Roman. "An Omega cannot lead warriors. She's fit for breeding, for healing. Nothing more." Roman's eyes flashed black, his growl vibrating the water glasses on the table. "Say that again, and you'll leave without your tongue." A calm voice cut through the tense air. Arya entered wearing a sharp charcoal suit, her presence commanding the room. She didn't shout, didn't raise her voice. She glided to Roman's side, placing a calming hand on his arm. With a terrifyingly pleasant smile, she addressed the rebellious Alpha. "I noticed you're sweating, Alpha Kyle. And your pupils are dilated. What are you prattling on about?" Kyle sneered. "The tea," Arya replied simply, gesturing to the empty cups. "I added a concentrated extract. Tea of drowsy willow. It's a muscle relaxant. In about 10 seconds, you won't be able to move your arms." Kyle tried to stand, but his knees buckled. His lieutenants slumped in their chairs, panic rising in their eyes as their limbs turned to stone. "You poisoned us," Kyle slurred. "I incapacitated a hostile command unit without throwing a punch," Arya corrected him, placing a vial of antidote on the table. "A true Alpha uses force. A true queen knows how to win without it. Do you still doubt my ability to protect this kingdom?" Kyle, now helpless and terrified, looked up at her. "No, my queen." Roman burst into laughter, his pride for her evident. The wedding was held at midnight, in an open-air amphitheater carved into the mountain's peak. Thousands of floating candles illuminated the snow as Arya walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away. She belonged to no one but herself. The gown of crushed velvet, embroidered with silver frost, fit her perfectly, an embodiment of the queen she had become. At the altar, Roman didn't wait for the priest. He descended the steps to meet her on the snowy ground. "I, Roman Blackwood," he vowed, his voice echoing off the mountain peaks, "claim you as my equal, my heart. Your enemies are my enemies." "I, Arya Vance," she replied, her voice steady and unshaken, "claim you as my Alpha. I will be your shield when you're weak and your home when you're lost." As their lips met, a howl erupted from the thousands of wolves gathered around them, a sound of unity that reverberated through the mountains. The lone Omega was no longer alone. 2 days later, Roman whisked Arya away on a snowmobile, driving deep into the Black Ridge Mountains. They stopped at the exact ravine where she had found him a year ago. "It wasn't 6 miles," Roman said softly, eyeing the tracks. "It was 7.5. I had it measured." They crested the final hill, but Arya's old, dilapidated cabin was no longer there. In its place stood a magnificent timber lodge with large glass windows and a smoking chimney. Next to it, a high-tech greenhouse sheltered her precious herbs, safe from the frost. "I couldn't save the shack," Roman murmured, wrapping his arms around her. "But I built this for us, a retreat. No guards, no politics, just us." Tears filled Arya's eyes. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," Roman whispered, pulling her close. "You carried me when I couldn't walk. Arya, now let me carry you." With a laugh, Arya threw her arms around his neck as he swept her off her feet, carrying her over the threshold and into the warmth of their forever. And that, dear listener, is the story of Arya and Roman. It reminds us that true strength isn't measured by claws, fangs, or how loud you can roar. Sometimes the greatest power lies in the will to keep moving forward when the world feels like a storm. Arya didn't just save a wolf that day. She saved a kingdom. She proved that compassion is the greatest strength, going from an invisible outcast to a queen who commanded respect. Not through fear, but through wisdom and resilience. What did you think of Arya's journey? Do you think you could have dragged a 300-pound wolf through a blizzard? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of romance, betrayal, and sweet revenge, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells YouTube you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. I upload dramatic stories every week.